from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. God bless you. Have a successful day.
Thank you, Reverend Johnson. Good morning, Senators. At this time, I'd like to extend condolences to individuals I believe that have had an impact on our communities in the Bahamas, and I know that there are other senators that would like to extend condolences as well. The first one would be Reverend Dr. Ralph Russell. I'd like to read into the records of the Senate a tribute given to him by me as President of the Senate, and I will also make his memory book available for senators to view. As a product of West Grand Bahama, I've known Ralph Russell my entire life. His remarkable journey proved an inspiration for past, present, and future generations. He is the story of a Christian carpenter from a humble yard in 8 Mile Rock who rose to prominence in the religious and business communities on Grand Bahama and the wider Bahamas. His success and achievements are directly linked to answering God's call and responding to the needs of the people, the church, dignified burials, food supplies, land, and housing. A devoted man of God and competent and committed businessman. The highlight and hallmark of Ralph Russell's time on earth has been family. He was a loving and caring leader of his family. He was a strong and compassionate provider who taught his children, family members, friends, and communities by example. Ralph Russell possessed a gentle and quiet mannerism, but his business acumen and fight for justice and equality for the common man spoke powerfully. I deem it a privilege to have known Ralph Russell and treasure the bond and relationship I tightened with him over the years. Every meeting with him was warm and filled with love. Every chat was a rich life lesson. He stood a man among men. His passing hits me like many with a feel of bittersweet. I am sad he is no longer with us, but joyful for his magnetic journey that brought immeasurable good. He was a giant from the rocks. 8 Mile Rock, Grand Bahama, our Bahamas, and the universe has lost an iconic figure. I find solace in knowing the spirit and tremendous contribution of Ralph Russell's 98 years will never really die. He has been a nation builder, and his children and their family continue to excel and carry his magnificent legacy. His was a full and meaningful life. I extend condolences on my own, my family, and members of the Senate on behalf to his children, family members, church community, colleagues, and friends. Also to the Hanna family of Grand Bahama on the passing of Queenie Harriet Hanna, who was a very successful businesswoman in Grand Bahama. Queenie was a very kind woman, particularly in her catering business, and she gave to schools, churches, and many businesses. Her catering business was truly a ministry of God. May their souls rest in peace and rise in glory. I know that there are other senators that may want to also bring condolences, and we can do that at this point. Yeah. The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Carl Bethel.
Thank you so very much, Madam President. May I first associate myself with your remarks about late Reverend Dr. Ralph Russell. I did not personally know him, but any man, any person who has labored in God's vineyard and has set an example as a beacon of light to the faithful is deserving not only of recognition in a place such as this, but of our grateful thanks for his service. And I thank his family for allowing him to have done so. And so I join with you, Madam President, in marking the passing of a religious icon in Grand Bahama. Since last I was in this chamber, and I did miss the meeting on Friday because I was traveling back from the great country of Guyana, where we held a Caribbean Financial Action Task Force meeting, and had certain meetings with the European Financial Action Task Force group, representing the OECD. And it all has to do with the mutual evaluation of the Bahamas, which report was finalized shortly after we came into office. Since that time that I was last here, a number of powerful individuals who served their country nobly and well have passed, and I thought it fitting this morning to bring some words of commendation, condolences, and thanks to their family members, and to recognize the outstanding contributions that they made. First and foremost among them is one of my mentors, my law partner for a while, and a truly great Bahamian, the late Sir Arlington Griffith Butler. Sir Ali was a man larger than life. And that says a lot, because he was a man larger than virtually every other Bahamian from then. Big, tall, handsome, dark, bold, boisterous. He was all of these things. Courageous. He, as a young man, joined the struggle for majority rule. He was known in PLP ranks as one of the most forward thinkers of his day. He, together with Carlton Francis, were among the earliest advocates for an independence movement within the PLP. My earliest recollection of Sir Arlington Butler was at the time when, after 1972, he served as Speaker of the Honorable House of Assembly, that other place. And I've always got this image in my mind of passing down Bay Street. I was a passenger in a vehicle, and seeing this enormous, dark-skinned man in breeks with stockings, black, with a big fluffy white ruff in the front, and big silver buckles on his shiny black shoes, just standing at the corner of Bay Street and Parliamentary. Someone said, "Oh, that's the Speaker of the House, Mr. Butler." Never forgot that image. So Ali and I, he did have, yes, as I said, Sir Ali was a man with large appetites as well, and he was a connoisseur of the best foods. But Sir Ali and I came to be very close when I, around about 1986, joined his practice, and we worked very well together. In fact, one of the funniest memories that I had is that, of course, up to that point, I had only ever done civil law. So, you know, Sir Ali called me into his chambers one morning in his best British voice and says, "Young Bethel, here's your first criminal brief." He drops it down on the table. So I look at it. Murder. I said, "Man, Ali, I haven't been in a criminal court before. How you give me a murder trial to do?" "Don't worry, young man, you'll learn." And that was that. Yes. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. I don't know, I suppose infamous record as a criminal defense lawyer. I never lost a murder. Infamous. I said infamous. Never lost one of those cases. And starting with the very first one that I was foisted on me by Sir Arlington Butler. One of the fondest memories that I have of Sir Arlington was that day when he came bouncing into the office and says, "Here, this is my mortgage. I paid it off. I'm going to have a big party for Sheila." And he gave me my invitation. And he had a wonderful, all of his buddies and pals and friends, the late Canon Willie Thompson, all of them were there to celebrate. And he was so proud that that day he was able to burn his mortgage for Sheila. Those are my memories of Sir Ali. We all know that he played a pivotal role, certainly one of the more how should I say, exciting events in the early political Bahamas history when he, together with his buddies, and he as Speaker, entertained a motion by Carl Francis, a sneak attack on the Public Disclosure Bill. When Carl Francis, noting that only 2 PLPs had gotten back from what appeared to have been a rather long luncheon, and the House being called into session, Carl Francis, who at that time had become disaffected with the leadership of the PLP at that time, although he remained a member, moved a motion that the bill be read 6 months hence, meaning effectively killing the Public Disclosure Bill that was being proposed by the then government. And Sir Ali allowed the motion to proceed and immediately appointed a select committee to study the bill before it could be brought back, which then occasioned the government to come in and promptly prorogue the House. And once the House was prorogued, they then set up a speech from the throne, which I think at 3 minutes was the shortest speech from the throne ever given anywhere in the history of Parliament by acting Governor General Sir Gerald Cash at that time. It was one of those colorful episodes that showed his courage. Of course, when you opposed the PLP in those days, you didn't have a chance running against them. And the government at that time then took steps immediately following that episode to get rid of its ranks, among its ranks, any of the dissident elements within the party, among whom was Arlington Butler. And we had the famous Night of the Long Knives, where everybody having been granted their nominations by a rebellious National General Council of the PLP, the Prime Minister at that time and his senior ministers all threatened to resign. They adjourned the proceedings to the next night, and the next night everybody was duly stripped of their nominations, including Sir Ali. But, 1977. But things being the way they were, Sir Arlington ran independent and lost, but eventually found his way to a new political home, the Free National Movement, where he was elected in 1992 for the Salem constituency, served as minister, I believe it was of Labor, for a while and for a full term. And in the second term, he then took an appointment to become ambassador to Washington and his knighthood. Sir Arlington Griffith Butler will go down as a giant, literally and figuratively, in Bahamian history. He is undoubtedly one of the founding fathers who struggled for majority rule, who ushered in, as part of that group of founders, an independent Bahamas, and who made his mark upon this country in ways that few of us will have the opportunity to do. It is therefore fitting that the government has determined to give Sir Ali a state funeral, and it is entirely well-deserved. My condolences go out to his wife, Lady Butler, his children, who I've known since they were very young teenagers, and I've watched them grow and develop, and they're all wonderful children in their own right, and our credit to Sir Ali and his dear wife Sheila, Lady Butler. I extend to his entire family my deepest and most profound sympathy, and on behalf of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, for whom I speak in this place, I offer to them the sympathies of the government and the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. We thank you for Sir Ali. We thank Sir Ali for his great and enduring contribution to our nation's development.
Thank you, Honorable Senator. Senator has indicated he has another condolence to bring.
Yeah, I have another condolence to bring in respect of a former member of this place, the late Member of Parliament for Fort Fincastle and Senator, as well as Parliamentary Secretary for the Ministry of Health, Calvin Johnson. Calvin was elected in that rush, which was the 1992 elections. We didn't have the word tsunami at that time, but that was truly an election that was a political tsunami. And someone at that time, it was Alfie Maycock, represented Fort Fincastle. He was cabinet minister, and they were unassailable. And yet, on the 19th of August 1992, cabinet minister after cabinet minister went down like bowling pins, one of whom was Alfred Maycock in Fort Fincastle. So Calvin was a peer, a classmate, if you will, in political terms. We were both elected in that wave election. I for Holy Cross, defeating the then cabinet minister, Charles Carter, and a host of FNMs through the length and breadth of this country. Calvin was tall, handsome, gregarious, easy of address, and quick-talking young fellow at that time. He was very eager to serve his people. But you know, none of us were in the first rush to get into cabinet. So we all decided, you know what? We got to make ourselves relevant. We can't just sit on the back bench and say, yes, sir, to what the government does. So we formed the Backbench Caucus. We all met at the home of Attorney Floyd Watkins, who at that time was also a member of Parliament. So we, as a group of about 7 or 8 of us backbenchers, we were plotting now we're going to set up a caucus, and we're going to be agitating. We're going to make ourselves known and make a name for ourselves so that the next go-round, they'll have to appoint us to cabinet. Well, we all did that. We had the meeting. So now it's time to, who's going to lead the caucus? Chuck Virgil was the ringleader. So everybody say, Chuck, you got to be the leader. Chuck said, not me. So Dion, folks, was the deputy ringleader. So we said, well, Dion, you got to be. Dion said, not me. They said, what about you, Carl? They said, not me. So everybody was not me. The only one, we said, finally, we said, Calvin, what about you? He came after me. Calvin said, okay. So we all voted and we elected Calvin the leader of the Backbench Caucus, which he was for just about a week, because he was immediately appointed by the then Prime Minister, Hubert Ingram, to be Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Health, which took him off the backbench. You know, in those days, Ingram was fast on his feet. He wasn't going to take anything coming and juking him from the back. So he decapitated the caucus right away. So we all gloried in Calvin's ascension, and Chuck wasn't far behind, and so it went. After the 1997 elections, Calvin did not run because his constituency was split up and divided. So he was appointed a member of this Honorable Senate, where he served ably and well for that period. And you know, it has been a tremendous loss to the Bahamas. I mean, we were shocked. I was shocked to hear of his sudden passing. And so, and to his son and his daughter, his wider family, who I had the opportunity to offer condolences at the funeral, and to all of his wider family, on behalf of the government and the people of the Bahamas, I wish to thank you for allowing Calvin to serve the Bahamian people. I commend his service, and I pray that the Lord, God above, will give him eternal rest in the gardens of bliss. And on behalf of the government and the people of the Bahamas, I offer my deepest condolences to his family. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bethel. Has many? Oh.
quaint island of Spanish Wells. She, and may I allow me to read what we had put in the place in the booklet honoring her about 2 weeks ago. Monia Pinda. She was born in Spanish Wells on November the 6th, 1945. She received her education at Spanish Wells All-Age School. From her childhood days, Monia was always active in her community and helped wherever she could. She learned to cook, bake at an early age and continues to do so. Monia could be described as one of our 5-star generals for the Free National Movement. She was a member since its inception in Spanish Wells. She took on the challenge of being a freedom fighter and keep up the flame, and she never looked back. She has campaigned for candidates such as Joe Albury, Norman Solomon, Noel Roberts, Alvin Smith, and recently our recent MP from that area, with Ricky Mackey. Monia has been a delegate and has attended just about every convention held in Nassau by the Free National Movement. She was a local pastor in her church, and she attended church on a regular basis. Monia was married to Erling, and they are the proud parents of 3 beautiful daughters, Andrea, Rosanna, and Nicole. And so on behalf of our Free National Movement Party and the government of Bahamas, I'd like to pay condolences and tribute to Monia and her entire family. May her soul in peace.
Thank you, Honorable Senator. Further condolences? Okay. Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Jay Dorsett.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd just like briefly to add my condolences to those of my fellow senators for all of the icons that have recently passed, including Ronnie Butler, Miss Monia Pinder, Queenie Russell, I forgot her last name, from Freeport, Queenie Hannah, Calvin Johnson, and Sir Arlington Butler. Some of those I knew only briefly, and some I knew rather well, but I would just like to express my condolences to the families and to thank them for the good work that their relatives had done in the country at large. Just briefly, Madam President, I'd like to just say a little bit about my experience with Sir Arlington Butler. I remember him as a young girl in Government High School, and one day, as Carl described him, this tall, dark, impressive figure walked into a classroom, and we learned he was a new teacher. And he was so big, and we had a lot of little English teachers then. He was just this very tall, overpowering figure. And we were a little afraid of him, and we started to talk and giggle about him and what he was all about. But he let me know very shortly after that he knew my mother and my father and my big sister, so I'd better behave myself. And I did, at least around him. But that was... Spent a lot of time in detention, but that's another story. Madam President, beyond that, I knew Sir Arlington as a political colleague. I followed him in politics after he left teaching, and then later on, I felt honored to be one of his political colleagues. In the 1992 election, I was asked very late in the game to run in Fox Hill. And as a newcomer, he was one of the people that gave me advice here and there. And he was very supportive. But even after I lost, he was still very encouraging about my political career. He felt that I had one and that I should go on. And I thank him for that. I had the opportunity to travel with him and Lady Sheila Butler through the islands a couple of times. And I was very impressed with how his kindness and his nurturing temperament. So I really grew to love and respect Sir Arlington. Later on, as he moved on and he became ambassador to the U.S., I visited him. I visited Washington and had an opportunity to be with him, to spend some time with him. And I really enjoyed that because he took me to some really nice restaurants and we had a really good time. So I have some really good memories of Arlington throughout his life. We'd always meet and talk and, chat and joke. And I was very saddened when he became ill and, of course, saddened that he had passed. So I'd like, Madam President, to extend my condolences to his widow and his children and his entire family. And I thank him posthumously for all that he did for the country and for our party. I'm sure that we're all now standing on the work that people to Arlington and people like him did. And I'd also like briefly to just say a little about Calvin Johnson. Carl knew him, of course, better. He interacted with him. But again, we were one of that class of 1992. And he and I were both new to politics. And again, we had to exchange some thoughts and ideas on how to get elected. Well, he was elected, and I wasn't at that time, but it was really a wonderful experience. And Calvin was also a neighbor. He lived not very far from me, so we would meet periodically in the food store and around the neighborhood and chat. And he was really a wonderful, gentle, just a great guy to know, quite apart from politics. And so, Madam President, I'd also like to extend my deepest condolences to Calvin Johnson's family, and may their souls all rest in peace.
Further condolences.
Here this morning. I'd like to say I did not know Mrs. Pinda from Harbor Island. Spanish Wells, I'm sorry. But just based on the comments that you have made, obviously she was a bulwark of our party, and so I share condolences with her family. Ronnie Butler, who has been an icon in entertainment in our country, I would really like to extend heartfelt and sincere condolences. Much has been said about him. I never knew him personally, but of course I knew of his work for many, many years. And I hope that some of the things that he did, particularly with his music, can be a part of the archives of the Bahamas as we move forward, because I think he sets an example for many of the upcoming individuals who are in the entertainment business. Mr. Calvin Johnson, of course, I did not know him, as the former speakers have indicated, but surprisingly, in November of 2016, just a year ago, I had the occasion to speak with Mr. Johnson in the F&M headquarters on Mackey Street. He had come in to be considered as a potential candidate for the Centerville constituency, and as one of the individuals with whom he would interact was myself. And despite the fact that I did not know him very well, I had the opportunity to sit and chat with him about many, many things. And of course, it gave me some insight as to who he was as an individual, despite the fact that I had not known him for long periods of time. My condolences goes out to the family of Mr. Russell, again, who I did not know, but I would like to share with them, as I think we would do with any individual with whom in any area or arena we may have been associated with. But most importantly, I would like to say a few words about Sir Arlington Butler. Like Senator Dorset, I also came to know Sir Arlington as a student. And when he arrived at the government high school, we were small kids, and as our leader has said, he was large. And you listening to this very tall, heavy set, dark-skinned man with this very deep British accent, and you're saying to yourself, well, where did he come from? you know. But surprisingly, once you got to know Sir Ali, he became a friend for life. And one of the beauties about Sir Allington was that he never forgot you. Wherever he saw you, in whatever circumstance that you might have been, because I know maybe about a year and a half ago, I had occasion to meet him at an activity, and we started talking, and I says, I bet you don't know who you're talking to. And he said, of course, I know to whom I am speaking. That was so typical of him, and it really did your heart good to know that from little school days, he would have remembered you so well. And so this morning, I really would like to share my condolences with his entire family. I happen to have known his first wife, Sheila, well, because during some medical transitions, she came to Washington, at which time that is where I lived. And so I had occasions to interact with her in good times and not so good times. I don't know the children very well, but I also know his second wife, who had moved to Washington after some time, but again, she was there at some period when I was there. But most importantly, she was my Sunday school teacher. And so I came to know her in that form. And so I wish all of them sincere condolences. And it is a very difficult and trying time, I think, when we lose any loved ones. However, always know that the presence of God continues to lift them and give them peace in their grievance. Thank you.
Further condolences?
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I would just wish to add my voice to the chorus of condolences. Madam President, the thought came to mind as I heard colleagues speak of nation builders. And it seems as though in recent times we have lost a lot of our nation builders. So I do also want to add my condolences to the family of Calvin Johnson, also to the family of Sarlington Butler, and to the family of Reverend Ralph Russell from Grand Bahama, and also to the family of Ronnie Butler, an amazing storyteller, and has been able to sort of put our culture, has been able to capture our culture and our history and put it in a form that generations will be able to appreciate and to sing. I mean, that's the first time that I heard of guinea corn, hominy, and lard. And to be able to identify with high top tennis and with no socks, and what happens when you wear high top tennis and no socks and it rains. And so these real powerful images and memories that I believe will be left with us. But there are some people who may not be as well known, who we also lost, like in Grand Bahama, Miss Queenie Hanna, who has touched the lives of and she just is known as a mother and a provider and a community leader, and persons like Carver Grant, who was an engineer but also a tremendous community leader, and his office was in the same complex as my law office for many years. I think he's been in there for probably as long as my father's been in the Kipling building for well over 30-40 years. He's been there, and so we want to offer our most sincere condolences to his wife Veronica Grant and to his children Wendell Grant, and Wendy Grant. And just a personal condolences. This past week, I also lost, and we also lost my godfather, who again may not be as well known, Frank LaFleur. And I do want to offer condolences to his family, his wife Sandra, his children Shanika, and Teray LaFleur. Again, these people who may not have been well known in the public, but simply a good father, a good provider, a good grandfather, and those are also people who build our nation, one family at a time. And so I do want to echo the condolences to all of those persons who were mentioned who have passed. Thank you, Madam President.
Further condolences?
Thank you so much, Madam President. Madam President, I would also like to join you and our fellow senators on the condolences of Ms. Queenie Hanna, Ms. Ralph Russell, Mr. Carver Grant, as well as parliamentarians, the late Butler, as well as Calvin. One of the things that I've come to realize is that in life, we are here for a short time, and the things that we do for the benefit of people will sing out our legacy and give us the opportunity to remain on as individuals in our community. As far as Ronnie Butler is concerned, I will speak about him from time to time as I stand to my feet in various other Senate meetings. But I would like today to speak a little bit about the late Dr. Ralph Russell, who was an icon of a man on the island of Grand Bahama. I came to know Dr. Russell about 15 years ago while practicing medicine on Grand Bahama, and he became more like a father figure to me. I was amazed about the way how he was able to build a strong presence in the community of 8 Mile Rock, while at the same time make positive contribution to the growth and development of our country as a whole. He was a great family man, and the representation of his children was a clear indication of what family life is supposed to be. He was a reverend who practiced what he preached. You know, sometimes that sounds like that's the way to go, but as we look in our community, a lot of people who take high office in religion is not a true reflection of what they practice, what they preach. And so I want to join many of the voices around this table, as well as throughout the length and breadth of Grand Bahama, to honor this great man. I was fortunate, while Minister of Grand Bahama, along with Dr. Tinker, to be able to record his life story via ZNS. And I'm certain that the opportunity to edit that tape and to be able to present that in the community would be a great tribute to his legacy and great work on the island of Grand Bahama. And finally, I want to say a few words about Mr. Carver Grant, who was an excellent engineer, structural engineer, who was instrumental in many of the projects that we brought forth when I was Minister for Grand Bahama, and particularly one of the engineers overseeing the construction of the Fishing Hole Road Bridge. I happened to understand and learn about a year ago the details of his illness and the fact that he was struggling to fight a long terminal illness. And even in the midst of the illness, he was able to still contribute tremendous to the growth and development of our community. And so as we walk the length and breadth of the island of Grand Bahama, we can appreciate some of the great structural work that he has done and the contribution he has made as a professional engineer on the island of Grand Bahama. And so I send my condolences to his family, Carver Grant Jr., as well as Dr. Grant Taylor, who is a kidney specialist here in the island of New Providence, and to his lovely wife, who was by his side throughout the length and breadth of his illness. May their souls rest in peace.
Thank you, Senator. Further condolences?
Thank you, Madam President. I stand to join my colleagues in this place and send out condolences specifically to parliamentarians Calvin Johnson and Sir Allington Butler. Many would agree that Sir Allington Butler was an extraordinary man. And the work that he's done contributed to the nation building of the Bahamas. And so I want to join with my colleagues and extend condolences for his lifelong contributions that he left to be a staple in the building of this country. I also want to go and extend condolences to Mr. Ronnie Butler, who I call a cultural icon and a great pioneer. I pray that his family is comforted in their time of mourning, and I wish to remind him that songs like Burma Road will remain to be played throughout this Bahamas, and his legacy shall live on. I also wanted to stay a verse from the song the counselors had, "May the work I've done speak for me," because I think that is something that we should all work towards, that when we leave this earth, that we would have the work that we have done and the contributions that we have made to this country speak for us. And the verse says, "May the work that I've done speak for me. May the works that I have done speak for me. When I'm resting in my grave, there's nothing more to be said. May the works that I've done speak for me." And many of us stood today in this place and we spoke to the works of all of those that have went ahead. And I ask that their families accept these condolences. May they be comforted in their time of mourning, and may their souls rest in peace and rise in glory. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Further condolences?
Thank you, Madam President. I want to first identify with all that has been said about all of the individuals here this morning. Sir Arlington Butler, Mr. Calvin Johnson, Mr. Carver Grant, Reverend Ralph Russell, Ms. Queenie Hanna, Ronnie Butler, and I'd like to add to that Ricardo Marks, who was a justice of the Supreme Court and retired and passed away last week. One thing about living in a small country is you literally, if you're trying to find somebody, you literally, all you have to do, at least in our country, is stand up on Bay Street for 15 minutes, and the person you're looking for will pass by. So we got to know everybody. And it's a joy, really, to be in a small country because you land at the airport and everybody says, "Hey, you're back home. Where you been?" And you know everybody who's a customs officer, immigration officer. Well, these days, as you get older, you don't know the younger set, but they know you. And that's the joy of living in a small town. And so that is what I found the commonality of all of the expressions that are here today, is that we are but 400,000 people, and we know each other. And Arthur Hanna used to say one of the reasons why he would never write a memoir or a book about his political life was because you can't tell the real stories of what happened. And so when I heard your description of what happened in 1977, I said, well, I could tell a different story, but I won't, because that's not the occasion. But everyone has a story to tell, and it's an important story. I'd like to speak about a few of them. Ronnie Butler, for example. He released a song in 1968, it'll be 50 years next year, called Going Down Burma Road, which memorializes the riots of 1942, which were known as the Burma Road riots. But the line that I'd like to talk about now is the beginning line. He begins the song by saying, "Don't mind Livingston, Josiah is the JP." And that, of course, is connected to my old constituency, the constituency that I represented. And Josiah Ramming was the grandfather of now Senator Johnny Ann Dorset. And he was a JP. And I gather Livingston was his son. And the song was saying, don't mind Livingston, Josiah's the JP. And he takes us down memory lane through that song. When we were in government, decided that every year we would honor a particular musical artist. And we started 2 years ago, or a particular Bahamian artist. We started 2 years ago with Freddie Munnings and his tribute to the city of Nassau. And this year we did Sir Sidney Poitier as the Oscar-winning artist. And we had planned next year to mark the 50th anniversary of that song by a celebration of the life of Ronnie Butler. Unfortunately, he won't be around for such a tribute if we are able to do it. And I would commend the government to think about that, because the range of songs which he's contributed, and you know, Bob Dylan, who was a troubadour of my youth, has just gotten the Nobel Prize for literature for singing songs, you know, blowing in the wind. But when the Senator Thompson talked about those lines about, I remember when we used to go to high mass on Sunday morning with high top tennis and no socks on, and God help you if it rains because toe jam will kill you. I mean, and he didn't write those, he made those up. He was just I think they call it a scat. So he was just talking as he was recording. But it's pure poetry, because in those few lines, he was able to sum up all that we celebrated on Majority Rule Day, that we had come so far. And yes, we grew up with those things, dirt poor, but look where we are now. And I think that that was the genius of his music. And so it's an enduring contribution to our country. And then Calvin Johnson, who served as a senator. I served with him in this place. He served as a diplomat and as a member of parliament. And what I remember about him is that he came to public service without airs. You know, many people take to these positions and sort of live in a bubble. But this was a man who, in my view, always had his feet planted on the ground and was always easy to talk to, easy to approach. And the thing I think about public service is that to understand that even though you're on other sides, that, you know, sometimes you help a brother or a sister out from the other side. You know, I've had, you know, members of parliament from the other side come to me and say, look, you know, I can't say this, but this is something you need to say. Because that's the way politics is sometimes constructed. And he was always like that. And I appreciated working with him and thank him for his service. The last person, though, that I would like to speak about is a truly historical figure, and that's Arlington Butler. And I could speak for a long time about Arlington Butler. Probably need to continue where I left off in the memoir that I did back after Sir Lyndon Pinling's death. But, and I almost don't know where to start. But the thing that I think Bahamians should remember, or I remember him for, and which I would commend you, is that at a point when the Progressive Liberal Party administration was at its most powerful, between 1972 and 1977. This is a man who stood up and said, I'm not going to do it. And I'm PLP, and I was PLP then. And there's a quality which I have always admired, which is when it is time for you to do the right thing, no matter where you are, you're supposed to do that thing. Because all the people are watching you, all the youngsters are watching you, and they expect you to see how you're going to manage your life and your situation. I didn't agree with the maneuver at the time, but it was a bold maneuver, and it is a great exercise for those who want to know how Parliament works. The BJC exams are now being done, and every day, a mother or a father, they're calling me. How does the Constitution work? What does prorogue mean? What does dissolve mean? How do you get nominated for the House? So, if you went back to Eddie Minnis's song, Show and Tell, that explains the entire story of what happened in August 1976 when the public disclosure bill was brought to the House. As the Senator Bethel said, after the luncheon adjournment, there were members who disagreed with the public disclosure bill. They did not believe that their assets, income, and liabilities should be a matter of public record. And Arlington Butler was one of those who opposed it. But given what had gone and been argued in the public domain before, Sir Lyndon Pindling and his colleagues had decided that this was a matter of principle which they had to address. Thus came the public disclosure bill. And on the luncheon adjournment, on the return of the luncheon adjournment, the Speaker summoned the House, and together with the opposition and backbenchers from the Progressive Liberal Party who were dissidents, they were able to overcome with a temporary majority and send the bill to committee. And as Eddie Minnis says, the PM told the governor, prorogue this House quick. Bring it back in 10 days. These MPs think they're so slick. Tells you the whole story of the Parliament. But how Sir Arlington figured in it beyond that was that there was a letter sent by the leaders of the Progressive Liberal Party to him to ask him to attend a meeting qua member of the PLP to leader of the PLP and deputy leader. And he was offended by this. And so when the House reconvened, he gave an address to the House, which was carried live on the radio, as it then was. And he said, I'm a man, and you can't summon the Speaker. And I think many people found out then, a provision which is still in the Constitution is, you can't remove the Speaker. Once he's there until dissolution. Can't move him. No confidence doesn't help you, nothing you do. So when you're Speaker, you're the Speaker. So I remember him for that. I said, this is a man after my own heart. Now, of course, what we've come to see, and people have spoken well about him, is the gentle figure that we now see. But this is a tough fellow. I mean, please, make no mistake about it. This was a tough guy. And he knew how to fight in politics. And, I was the brunt of that at one point. I had started writing a column for the Progressive Liberal Party in 1976 in the party's newspaper called the Herald. And so, I was the target of every, bit of contempt that people could sling at me from the F&M side. I mean, I enjoyed it. I loved the notoriety. But he had a newspaper. He and P. Anthony White owned a newspaper called Friday Morning's Mail. So one Friday, newspaper shows up, and there's this double truck attack on me. My picture's in the front, in the middle of the thing, and they just slashed and burned everything they could say about me. Personal, public, anything, going and coming. It was horrible. It was really horrible. as a young man to be the object of that. I mean, everything you could think in the book. And I just thought, gee, I mean, you know, this is what you have to put up with as a public figure. Anyway, I'm going, yeah, I understand. I come into that. I come into that. You learn quickly. I think 76. No, I was about 76. Yeah, 76, I was 20. Yeah. Give as good as it takes. But I'm only saying. I mean, this was quite a thing. So I'm walking over to the House of Assembly one day, and Sir Arlington is on one side, Sir Lyndon Pindling on the other side. And so Sir Lyndon is looking at him, and he says, "Do you have a problem?" And Sir Lyndon says, "No," pointing to me. He says, "But it looks like you have a problem." And that was the only exchange on that. Right now, I'm planting this in my head as a young man. And I hope that this is a salutary lesson to those who are in public office today about divorcing your role of office holder from that of the personal. Because he became gravely ill, had suffered a stroke. And one day, as Minister for Immigration, I'm sitting in my office, and I get a call saying, Sir Arlington Butler is downstairs. So I hesitate for a bit. I said, "Oh, okay, well, you know, send him upstairs." He came. He was by himself. And he sat down in my office and asked me if he said that he needed a caregiver, and if it would be possible for me, as Minister for Immigration, to grant a work permit for his caregiver. And I thought to myself, good Lord Almighty, how life goes in a cycle. But the one doesn't have anything to do with the other. And that is how you ought to behave in public office. I never bore any grudge. I never took it to mean anything other than it is. But I tell younger politicians who are filled with hubris about their victory and, you know, 2,500 people voting for them and they're in office and so on and so forth, that you must carry your office lightly, to wear it lightly. And he evolved into a statesman for this country. He had been a leader of the Olympic movement for a long time. His name was synonymous with the Olympics in this country. And you could always ask advice. He had a great sense of history. And what I identify with, as both of you were talking about him as former teachers, is I used to say to him, "You must have taught everybody in this country." Because either he taught you in school or he was your cousin. I mean, I just never seen a man with so many cousins. That's my cousin. And if you were not in those categories, then you weren't known. And a tremendous wit. I really am pleased to have known him, to have interacted, to have the opportunity to be in public service in the Bahamas now going on 26 years. And then before that as a newspaper columnist and in broadcasting. So I've been a public figure for 40 years or more. And to have had this opportunity it's enriched my life tremendously. I wouldn't choose any other path. But to have met people like Sir Arlington Butler, to have interacted with them, and all the other people that we spoke of here today. It's been an enormous privilege and a proud honor on my part, and I wish to extend my condolences on behalf of our party, to join what everyone else has said here. I want to also extend condolences to the family of Justice Ricardo Marks. And I would say this, John Donne wrote these lines: "Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so." And then he says, "One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. My condolences to all of the families, and I thank you for this intervention.
Thank you, Senator Mitchell. Is there further condolences from you? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you let her before you do it?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Madam President, I rise and join my fellow honorable senators to also bring condolences to the families of Mr. Calvin Johnson, Monia Pinder, Reverend Dr. Ralph Russell, Sir Arlington Butler, Ronnie Butler, Carver Grant, and Queenie Hanna, and whether they were diplomats, parliamentarians, civil servants, or just carpenters, fathers and mothers, they all contributed to nation building in their own right and respect. And I would like to say Ecclesiastes 3:1 says, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under this heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. May we all live a life and leave an honorable legacy, especially like Sir Arlington Butler, Ronnie Butler, Calvin Johnson. May the family of the bereaved be comforted by the Holy Spirit, and may the souls of the departed rest in peace.
Further condolences?
Madam President, I wish to associate myself and the government with all of the remarks given by colleague senators in this place. I thought not to give my full list the first time, but I just want to say to join with leader opposite in his commendation of Ronnie Butler and my distinguished ministerial colleague Kwesi Thompson. I'll just say this about culture. We live culture. We don't think culture. It takes a man with a vision to be able, in a few short words, to say something that actually takes what we live every day and makes it a reality in the forefront of our mind. You see, we live in it, we don't think of it in the forefront. And then a singer comes, or a playwright like a Shakespeare comes, and in a few words, suddenly you realize, yeah, everybody nods their head. That's true, that's true, that's true. That's the magic of the late Ronnie Butler. That in a few short words, in any number of songs, whether they were the ribald ones, the historical ones, the classic ones, you nod your head every time saying, that's true, that says something about us. He will live I think, eternally in the heart and minds of future generations. I also wish to bring concluding condolences on the passing of the late Justice Ricardo Marks. Justice Marks came to the Bahamas and he took employment in the Attorney General's office as Director of Legal Affairs, where he served ably. That's the head person, right under the Attorney General, in charge of all civil matters. He then went on to become a Justice of the Supreme Court. After he'd served his time, he then went on to become the Law Reform Commissioner, or consultant in the Law Reform Commission, on behalf of the Office of the Attorney General. In that position, he helped us to craft many, many laws. My interactions with Justice Marks, most recently, was when he approached to argue the need that there was a widow of a brother justice who lived abroad and who was not being paid her pension. The email came maybe 2 days or so before his untimely passing. I was in Guyana speaking with the Attorney General of that country, and one of the persons he asked me is, how's Ricardo doing? I said, oh, well, wonderfully, still arguing me about pensions for some people. And then suddenly we had this terrible news. Everybody in my office is devastated who worked with Justice Marks and who knew him. And I wish on their behalf, on behalf of the government and people of the Bahamas, to express condolences on his passing as well. I trust and pray, as we say in church every Sunday, that light perpetual will shine upon all of the persons we've commemorated today. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to all senators for extending condolences this morning. I think it's very important for us to take the time to do so, particularly all these people we've talked about who have contributed to nation building. So again, thank you, senators. I do believe we had agreed last week, and Chair recognizes the Honorable Carl Bethel.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, with the, if I can obtain the unanimous leave of the House, I would beg leave for us to go back on the agenda so that we may bring our records up to date by the tabling and hopefully the approval of the minutes of the Senate meeting of the 22nd of June 2017 and of the 12th of October 2017. If I may have the consent of the House, so to do.
Is there a second? It has been moved and seconded that the minutes be adopted. As many are in favor, I'm sorry.
Go back first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes. Do you ask if Chris gives another consent? You can second.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I thought we knew that anyway.
Go back to the, then you go back to the agenda, and then you call the action. So the adoption of minutes.
Okay. Adoption of minutes.
Madam President, I move that the minutes of the meeting of this Honorable Senate for the 22nd of June 2017 be approved. If I may obtain a second.
Second, Madam Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that the minutes be adopted with corrections. As many are in favor would say aye. Those opposed, nay.
Aye.
The ayes have it. The minutes have been adopted with corrections. Also,
Madam President, may I beg leave to move that the minutes of the 12th of October 2017 be adopted. If I may obtain a second.
I so move, Madam. And I so second, Madam Speaker.
it has been moved and seconded that the minutes of June 12, 2017 be adopted. As many are in favor, say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The minutes have been adopted for June 22nd, 2017. Motions of leave of absence, leave to resign, swearing in of new senators, communications by the President, messages from the Governor General, messages from the House of Assembly, laying of documents by ministers, communications by ministers, communications by senators, questions, answers to questions, presentations of petitions, appointment of select committees, report of committees, first reading of bills. I'm sorry. The chair recognizes the Honorable.
Yeah, the committee that visited the Governor General, do they report at this point?
Reports committee. The Senator, the Honorable Jasmine Darius, led the committee along with Senator Reynard Penfield and also, I think, Senator JoBeth Colby Davis.
Why don't we defer that until the next meeting?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. First reading of bills.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I move for the second reading and committal of the Constitutional Amendment Bill 2017. If I may obtain a second.
I so second.
Okay. Let's go. I'm now, having made that motion, going to give a short speech.
Yeah, I thought
And then you give a short speech. Second. Okay. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Fred Mitchell.
Yeah, I know that the leader of government business indicated that they wanted to follow a certain procedure with regard to the matters on today's agenda, so will he be addressing that point?
Yes. Madam President, in consultation with the leader of opposition business, I've indicated that it is the government's intention to move the constitutional bill for second reading in committal, that the debate will cover both the constitutional amendment bill and the pensions amendment bill, and thereafter we'll move for the second reading in committal of the pensions amendment bill. In other words, we'll move the two bills, but separately with one debate for both bills. I had anticipated a short debate, but the leader of opposition business did make the point, whether he intends to fully utilize it is up to him, that because they are of not directly connected issues, they're not associated, like budget bills, for example. He's reserved the point that had the government gone the full way, it would have had to have two debates and therefore 45 minutes for each bill. And so he's reserved his right, if he wishes, to have his full time. And the government can have no objection to that, and I have accorded to him our consent. So timekeepers, if the leader opposite decides that he wishes to wax eloquent for a whole hour and a half, or acts inelegantly or ineloquently, then that is, he's to be accorded that time. Madam President, it is a great privilege to be able to rise in order to move for the second reading and committal of the Constitutional Amendment Bill 2017. The government at the last sitting of this chamber gave notice of what I've spoken, and we trust that both bills will be taken forward to final passage today. On the Constitutional Amendment Bill, Madam President and colleagues, this bill, the Constitutional Amendment Bill 2017, seeks to amend the Constitution of the Bahamas to provide for an independent Director of Public Prosecutions and to distinguish clearly the functions of the Attorney General from those of the Director of Public Prosecutions. It is said that the public interest is best served where prosecutorial decision-making is separated to the greatest extent possible from the external political influences, perhaps, or any other influences of an Attorney General. So they need not necessarily be political. They may be policy, they may be procedural, they may be administrative. It is now considered, if you will, international best practice to insulate the prosecutorial discretion and function as much as possible from the influence of politics. An independent Director of Public Prosecutions enhances not only the integrity, but the public perception of the integrity of the prosecutorial function and removes it from any suggestion of inappropriate political control or influence. And specifically, the bill seeks to repeal and replace the existing Article 78 of the Constitution, which speaks only to the role and function of the Attorney General, who, under the present constitutional structure, has fused powers. He has all of the powers of law enforcement or legal administration vested in him as of right under the Constitution. So he is responsible for both the civil dispensation and the criminal aspects of prosecutions in the country. Madam President, this bill will, once passed and enacted, create an independent Director of Public Prosecutions under the leadership of an independent DPP, who will have constitutionally authorized status, tenure, and the protection of his office. So, the Office of Director of Public Prosecutions, and before that it was called the Office of the Solicitor General, they were the highest level of public legal officers, not judicial officers now, legal officers, and they stood at the pinnacle of the exercise of the criminal jurisdiction under the Attorney General. This amendment will confer upon that officer and that office the status of being not just an administrative office that could be called one thing one day and then called something else the next, as occurred when the Solicitor General was converted into the Director of Public Prosecutions. It will confer a constitutional status upon the holder of that office and the office itself. And so, while the Attorney General, and I must premise all of this by saying that Article 78 of the Constitution is not an entrenched, nor is it a specially entrenched provision of our Constitution, which means that an amendment can be made to that article on a simple majority vote in both houses of Parliament. And it does no violence to the Constitution, because the Constitution has specifically reserved that power only to Parliament. While the Attorney General, under the amendment, will remain the principal legal officer of the Crown, meaning the state, the government of the Bahamas, and will remain, generally speaking, responsible for and accountable to Parliament for all legal undertakings for, on behalf of, or against the government of the Bahamas, including prosecutions. The DPP will, subject to such conditions as I will speak to momentarily, be independent on a day-to-day basis from political control or influence in the conduct of his constitutional authority and responsibilities. Under Section 3 of the bill, it is provided in a new Article 78, Subarticle 2 of the Constitution, that the Attorney General shall be responsible for the administration of legal affairs in the Bahamas. What does that mean? Well, it means that the Attorney General is accountable to Parliament. That's what responsibility means. A public servant, even a public servant with constitutional status, such as the Commissioner of Police, or a permanent secretary in a ministry, though they have constitutional status, they are not accountable to Parliament. So similarly, the highest public legal officer on the criminal side of the jurisdiction, the Director of Public Prosecutions, though he will have constitutional status, holding a high constitutional office, he's not accountable to Parliament, because he doesn't come here to get beat over his head and criticized or questioned or being made to answer for the way in which he performs his functions. That responsibility, that duty, that burden remains with the Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, who remains accountable to Parliament. And every agency of the government, there is no agency of the government that is not through a responsible minister accountable to Parliament. Our system does not admit of absolute independence from Parliament. Any exercise of the power of the state at some level must be accountable to the people's representatives in Parliament. That is what that phrase directly means. That no matter what goes on in the day-to-day thing, when push comes to shove, if there's an issue that has to be brought to the attention of the Bahamian people or answered to the satisfaction of the Bahamian people, the person that is called upon to answer to Parliament and through Parliament to the people will not be the Director of Public Prosecutions or the Permanent Secretary. In fact, it's very bad form for ministers to blame permanent secretaries for anything. Very bad form. And they often do, and every time they do, they are met with ribald scorn, not only from the opposite benches, but even from their own side, because it is well known that it's the minister who is responsible. Don't come here blaming OPS. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. So, that is to explain that when we strive for independence in operation and function, there always, at some point, there is a point where it is impossible to have full independence because we have a political system that is based on the concept that everything the government does is answerable to the People's Parliament, and therefore there always has to be a responsible minister. So, you know, the Attorney General and his senior legal officers, the DLA, Director of Legal Affairs for Civil Matters, and the Director of Public Prosecutions for Criminal Matters, always have to collaborate closely. And we trust that with the creation of the new office, this collaboration and close working together will continue. Because while who will get prosecuted or investigated or who will have a nolle prosequi issued in their matter will be matters exclusively, barring very limited exceptions, matters that will be dealt with by the Director of Public Prosecutions. The fact remains that in many, many areas, we will still have to collaborate and cooperate. Just in terms of assisting the DPP in ensuring what my predecessor would call swift justice, what I would prefer to think of as effective justice, because you could be swift and bad, swift and fail, left, right, and center. No, what I'm advocating is effective justice. Okay. Yeah, okay, that's fine. You could have swift justice by nollie in every single serious case. I know you don't want me to come and quote some reports that I had about what happened in the past. I'm not, no, I know. But I'm not dealing in this debate with any, because there's blame to go around, but funny nollies all around, and I ain't into that part. But there has been a culture of nollying in the past. Yes. I had reason to refuse one today. Absolutely. Don't come to me with that. Okay? Go there and fight the case, win, lose, or draw. But there's a suggestion in the past, one could look at it, that a lot of nollies were entered into to assist in the reduction of the backlog. We come to that in a minute. No, today, no, I still have to sign them. And I refuse to sign them today, one today.
You sign them next week.
No. When the bill comes into law, then all of those who keep liking to write on top of these documents, AG, I recommend this, right? I had one in front of me today. I look at it, I read the file, I said, absolutely not, send it back. Go to court. Okay? But those who like to write AG, I recommend this all the time, they'll have to make that decision. They recommend it to themselves, and they make that decision. Okay. So there will continue to need to be extensive cooperation in critical areas to support the efforts of the Director of Public Prosecutions to ensure improvements and continuing improvements in the administration of justice and in the progress that we hope to make in reducing the backlog and ensuring a more effective and efficient system, particularly of administration in the criminal law, so that victims of crime and the criminals will be subjected to an effective process that leads towards resolution, closure, guilty or not guilty. Now, as occurs in similar common law jurisdictions in this Caribbean region, and in more developed, I suppose, countries in some ways, such as Canada, the Attorney General, being the person, and in the United Kingdom, responsible and therefore accountable to Parliament for the administration of justice, has, in this bill, reserved to him the right to give general and specific directions to the Director of Public Prosecutions. Under the Constitutional Amendment, Article 78(3), that right will be specifically limited to matters involving public policy, national security, and the international obligations of the Bahamas. In that other place, the House below, members of the opposition, and I see that the leader on the other side is going down the same path of error as his colleagues in the other place. In the other place, members of the opposition were quick to, somewhat shamelessly in my view, point out that the notorious Hales noli prosequi, issued at the instance of the former Attorney General under the hand of the acting Attorney General at that time, Jerome Fitzgerald, was claimed at that time to be a matter of national security. Hence, according to the PLP, nothing will change. Well, sorry, brothers and sisters, it's not that kind of party. In reply to this spurious aspersion and assertion in that other place, the government moved an amendment to the bill which will now mandate that any specific directions given by the Attorney General, not only as the original bill provided, must be in writing, signed by the Attorney General, but by way of an amendment moved on the committal of that bill, as we will move an amendment on the committal of this bill, such instructions must be in writing, signed by the Attorney General, and published in the Gazette. What it will stop is this: when it is published in the Gazette, every Bahamian reading the newspaper will be able to see exactly what the Attorney General told the Director of Public Prosecutions to do, why he told him to do it, and what the rationale or reasoning was as to why he told him to do it. Anyway, yeah, he really need to behave. Okay? So it must be gazetted. So it will be published in the newspapers, and the general public will immediately be informed of the facts and the rationale of the Attorney General in giving a specific direction. I can inform this Parliament today that once this Senate today, which is a House of Parliament, that is what is in the Constitution. That's another question. I agree on the need for reform. One day we'll perhaps debate a bill for an elected Senate. We'll come back to that. I can inform Parliament and the Senate that once the bill is enacted into law, hopefully early next year and before the end of January 2018. And I'll say that because the only delay in my mind, in terms of when I would advocate it comes into force, is that we are seeking to secure appropriate and adequate office space to relocate all the office of the DPP and all of his prosecutors into a separate building. We are looking at this point in time at the building right next door, because a lot of support services will need to stay located for space reasons in our building, and also to separate some of the functions, that case management, witness care, and all of these functions necessary to support the prosecutor's efforts would remain in our building. We'd be able to bring them back from a building 1.5 miles down the road into our office, and there will be a walkway linking the two buildings if that construct comes into being. And we're arguing for it because it's critically necessary for prosecutors to stay in touch with their files and with the witnesses and with the case managers, so that we have a seamless structure that will ensure that witnesses are there when the trial is called, that the victims or victim is there to give their testimony, that any support evidence required, whether it's medicals, ballistics, other forensics, are there at trial, so that the trial process moves along effectively and smoothly towards a desired result, closure after due legal process. So hopefully by the end of January, if not before, this will be affected. Once the office is separate, boom, the law will be brought into force, hopefully, immediately, or in anticipation once we have the situation worked out. And the first thing that I will do is I propose, in consultation with the DPP, and we've spoken about it, we are working on a document now, I propose to issue a special direction, which will be gazetted. This special direction will incorporate a new code of ethics for public prosecutors. They have a code. It is an imperfect document. Both the DPP and I agree, having regard to the model code of ethics for prosecutors issued by the Commonwealth Secretariat, that it would be a desirable event to marry the two documents, to enhance the existing document, to create a new code, which will be the very first document that will be promulgated through a direction that is published in the Gazette and published so that every Bahamian can see this code of ethics, the new code for all public prosecutors. The second document that, once again, in consultation with the Director of Public Prosecutions, we both agree is highly desirable, will be based on a manual code, a model code developed by the Commonwealth Secretariat again. This one will govern relations between the Attorney General and the Director of Public Prosecutions. When it is gazetted, it will mandate that in any direction, whether specific or general, given by the Attorney General to the Director of Public Prosecutions, such direction must be, let me get the wording right, legally justifiable, transparent, and in the interest of justice. Must be, any direction must be in those things, and any specific direction must contain a rationale that is in writing, that explains why the direction is given.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Frederick Mitchell.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to understand the point you're making. You're saying that pursuant to the power under the new amendment, that you are going to issue a set of directions, which will be in the form of a code, which governs how the Director of Public Prosecutions is going to interpret what directions you're giving him? Is that what you're saying?
No. Let us, if we're going to be confused, let's be confused about what was actually said. I said nothing about how the director would interpret anything. I said that this code, based on a model code developed by the Commonwealth Secretariat, will indicate the way in which and the duties that would be imposed on the Attorney General in giving any directions. That any directions, any specific or general, given by the Attorney General to the DPP must be transparent, must be legally justifiable, and must be in the interest of justice. That is what the code will call for.
Now, I'm going to allow this now, but you know, we're dealing with points of order here. If you have a point of order, if this is a point of clarification, or would you...
So the issue of bettering your discretion, how does that apply in terms of this? Does it better your discretion?
I don't think a concession that anything done by this office must be legally justifiable and in the interest of justice fetters any discretion. Because a discretion improperly exercised is not a discretion, it's an abuse. Madam President, I do not wish to dig up any buried bones of the past. Suffice it to say that the issuance of questionable discontinuances of prosecutions, what we all call nullies, and more recently, funny nullies, has not been the exclusive preserve of any one party or any one government or any one Attorney General. All, I say, have sinned and fallen short of the glory. So it is extremely important to note that not only is putting this 6 degrees of separation from the day-to-day control or influence of an Attorney General, a political creature in some ways, who's also a constitutional creature, who also has to be a judicial creature. He's rather like a family island commission. He's all things to all people. That's the way the Attorney General is by nature. But putting some degree of separation between the prosecutorial function on a day-to-day basis from the appearance or perhaps the political influence of that aspect of the Attorney General's function is in the best interest of the Bahamas and the Bahamian people and the perception of the rule of law in our country. It is in our best interest. It is also, however, also deemed by the international organizations such as the Financial Action Task Force, the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, any number of organizations, and I know that Senator Thompson will speak to the OAS, also the OAS. It is deemed to be best practices to put a layer of separation. We were doing this long before I went to Guyana. Madam President, in fact, the achievement of an independent prosecutor has been a long-term goal of the Free National Movement. In fact, we passed the very first bill towards that end in 2001 in the run-up to the failed 2002 referendum. In my view, though, this draft bill today is a much better draft than the 2001 draft for a number of reasons, even if I may say so myself. Yeah. for a number of reasons. The first is it goes to the extent of It has a transitional provision, so we don't have to go looking for a DPP. The present DPP is deemed, once this is passed and enacted, to have been appointed pursuant to the amending bill, which means he will automatically have a 5-year term without having to go through the indignity of applying for his job. Let me say about the present DPP, Mr. Garvin Gaskin. He is, I think, one of the finest legal minds, certainly on the prosecutorial side. We have many. No. He's going to be independent, man. I don't even sweeten up. Don't mean nothing. It means nothing. But no, I think you have to give credit where it's due. There are many times, when, attorneys general feel a little bit of the, we be more emotional because, we also come from a political root. So, I'll fulminate, man, we got to do this, we got to do that. And then he goes to this little pad he has here, taps, well, unfortunately, Minister, see what this law says here. You see? And I'm grateful. Yeah, you see, well, that's what attorney generals say. Man, just say, just extradite him. Do it, just worry about what the law say. That sort of thing. That is not in my power. That has to do with another person, another minister who has certain powers there. But I say that really jokingly, right? But it's not intended to be a serious comment, except I suppose maybe it might have occurred under my predecessor. But anyway, I'll leave that alone. It went to the Privy Council. The Privy Council upheld it, no problem. The Privy Council upheld it. But I'm just saying that attorneys general have, they feel the pressure and they sometimes want to demand a result. And it's good to have someone who could pick up his iPad or turn to a law and say, Minister, this prevents you from running on like that. That's the point I'm making. And one thing I could always count on with both the present Director of Legal Affairs, Ned Bonamy, and also Garvin Gaskin, is that when I run out, they are quick to find the right law to put brakes on me. Okay. That's okay. I'm not the law. I'm bound to follow it, and I am bound to follow it, and I am well advised by my senior staff when I want to run out what the law is, and I thank them. And I thank Mr. Gaskin. I have complete confidence in him that he will be not only the first constitutional director of public prosecutions, but certainly continue to be a great DPP. And so I have every confidence in him. And so I point again that this bill has a transitional provision. He will not have to go through the indignity of applying for the job he presently holds. Secondly, it limits the term of the DPP to a maximum of 2 5-year terms or 10 years. 2 terms or 10 years, whichever is the greater. So, whichever is the lower. So you can only serve for a total of 10 years. And that's really a policy-based thing, the thinking being that we don't want to have generations of J. Edgar Hoovers in charge of prosecutions who sort of, get it as a lifetime job and die in it and do untold harm because they get too used to who they are and their power. So the idea was to have some limitation, but the idea was not to tie it to the political cycle, the understanding being that, since he's not going to, this isn't coming in an election year, the 5 years will be off the election thing, and so it won't be tied to directly to politics, the reappointment. The DPP also has all of the constitutional protections in his tenure, as is accorded to the Commissioner of Police and the Justice of the Supreme Court. No, unless he wants to become High Commissioner to London, in which case we would be very happy to assist him, as we have others. Yeah, no, and we do so. We are more than happy. We are a government that wishes to give fulfillment to all of our senior public officers, to the extent to which they can have fulfillment in terms of their career goals and what they'd like to do and achieve in their lives. We're here to serve and to assist. Now, if I may continue. So, finally, we also put in this bill a clause that further ties the hand of the state in its dealings with the DPP they may not like, if that should ever happen. It prevents the abolition of that office while there's a substantive holder in place, thereby preventing, for example, the government saying, okay, fine, we'll go back to having a Solicitor General, find some nice pliable person, make the Solicitor General there, and abolish the office while someone is in place who is maybe troublesome. Okay? So, in these ways, this law really seeks to enhance and support the functional independence of the DPP and to insulate and protect not only the office holder, but the office itself from political interference. The new Article 78A then goes on, it's the addition to the 78 that has been amended now. Article 78A in the bill sets out the specific functions, the establishment of the office and functions of the Director of Public Prosecutions, Article 78A. And this Article 78A will empower the DPP to institute and undertake criminal proceedings against any person before any court in respect of any offense against the law of the Bahamas. So it will no longer be attorneys general or acting attorneys general either receiving or seeking advice to sign nollies. They won't be signing them. It will only be the director of public prosecutions or someone acting in that capacity. So if he's away and he has someone acting, the director will have the power to take over and discontinue any criminal proceedings that may have been brought by any other person. So even as notoriously happened in the last administration, where there was some blowback, and recently in the debate in the other place, over a decision to enter a nollie in a private prosecution of a labor dispute. That will no longer be something that attorneys general, any attorney general, will have a say on. It will be for the Director of Public Prosecutions to decide. Now I'm going to say this. I'll say this, that if a DPP were to do something similar in terms of a private prosecution that is controversial, it would be well advised to have a chat with the Attorney General, because knowing that, and we all know what actions, types of actions would be controversial, knowing that it would be controversial or likely to be, the question about it is going to be asked in a place where the DPP can't answer or defend himself. So if he wants to be well defended, and if he wants, he or she as DPP, want to be well defended, and want not to be repudiated on the matter or receive a directive to rescind this, and because with a nollie you can always restart. So, and not to be embarrassed by it because there's some pressure on a matter, then of course there should be some kind of consultation, some kind of exchange. But in any event, whether there is or isn't, once the DPP does act in any matter, even in a matter like that, in his view, if it is in the public interest not to prosecute or to have a private prosecution, that's his sole constitutional right. Period. But you know, we don't want to be like Wolsey. Nobody wants to be like Cardinal Wolsey, lying up, facing physical death, saying, oh, if I had only served my Lord the way I served my King, he would not have left me to die like this. And by that I mean that the most important thing for any public official to do, particularly a legal official, is to serve the law and the public interest. Don't worry about serving the King. Because politicians can be very sometimey, And my only advice is serve the law and the public interest. I won't engage on Thomas More. I believe that when? But he took the job knowing he had to follow the King's directive. Well, exactly. Okay. The proposed Article 78B. Look, Henry VIII told him as he saw a man fall seasons, he stuck his leg out and said, I will brook no opposition on this matter. Okay. The proposed Article 78 also speaks to the tenure of the DPP and specifically the limitation of 5 years and 5 years and not beyond the age of 68. That's the same as justices of the Court of Appeal. Further, the removal of the DPP from office can only be effected on the basis of his inability to discharge the functions of his office or misbehavior, as I say, the tenure of a judge. The bill also seeks to balance the establishment of the clear independence of the DPP with a measure of accountability. And as we indicated, the Attorney General is able to issue some directions. All in all, I commend this bill to colleagues in this chamber and to the Bahamian people as the best balance between independence and accountability to Parliament and the people that could be achieved in the circumstances. It is not a bill that was drafted to make no real change, but to create a perception. It was a bill that from its inception, I and the draftspersons worked on with the intent that this bill would make a meaningful change in the Bahamas and bring meaningful improvement to the administration of justice. I commend it to you, Madam President, and all my colleagues. On the Pensions Amendment Bill, this bill very simply creates now a special regime for commissioners of police and commanders of the Defense Force. It gives them greater flexibility in terms of retirement should they wish. A permanent secretary has to serve for 40 years or 10 years in the office of permanent secretary before being entitled to a full pension and gratuity. I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. The bill that we have today reduces that 10-year period to a 7-year period for commissioners of police and commanders of the Defense Force. Now, what does it mean when I say full pension and full gratuity? Well, in 1998, a special regime was created to benefit permanent secretaries and the heads of the armed services. Under the pre-existing Pensions Act, the law, which still applies to every other public servant, is and was in respect of permanent secretaries and commissioners and Commander of Defense Force, that if on retirement a public servant took a gratuity, that's a lump sum payment, at the time that they applied for their pension, they lost up to a quarter of their pensionable emoluments. So that would mean that your pension is a monthly payment of a percentage of your salary prior to your retirement. And if any public servant other than commissioners of police, commanders of defense force, and permanent secretaries takes a gratuity at the time of their retirement, there's a reduction in the amount that they receive every month. They don't get their full pensionable emoluments. Now, in 1998, a regime was created for the benefit of permanent secretaries, which included Commissioner of Police, Commander of Defense Force, to allow them to get their full gratuity on retirement and have no reduction in the amount of their monthly pensionable emoluments. So they would then get what we colloquially call a full pension and a full gratuity. That is the basis for which the present law that is being amended, the present Section 5, I think it's under Section 4 of the Pensions Act, where the deduction is to be found that applies to every public servant who takes a gratuity. They have a reduction in their pensionable emoluments every month. Section 4. But the new Section 5, the Section 5 that presently is in place applies to permanent secretaries, Commissioner of Police, Commander of Defense Force. What this bill does is to take Commissioner of Police and Commander of Defense Force out of the general Section 5 provision and creates a special provision for Commissioners of Police, Commanders of Defense Force, allowing them, after 40 years of service, which is the maximum in terms of the calculation of pensionable entitlements. So if you serve 41, it doesn't add anything more. And, or 7 years in the office of Commissioner of Police and Commander of Defense Force. That will give them the same entitlement to full pension rights, full gratuity, full pensionable emoluments, no deduction. That is the intent of the bill. The last Commissioner of Police, who, by all accounts, including his own, felt that it was time for him to move on and requested that he be permitted to retire. He was offered a post in London, which he accepted. The difficulty was that he had served 30 years on the force in ranks, starting from private up to deputy commissioner, and had only served 7 years as a commissioner of police, for a total of 37 years. The commissioner, therefore, under the existing Section 5, would not have qualified for a full pension, even though he was going off in other pensionable service in another department as a high commissioner, which is a pensionable office. He would not have qualified because he did not meet the 40-year standard or the 10 years of the permanent secretary. And so it was felt, and he agreed and accepted, that we should make this accommodation. And that is what this bill will do. And so, Madam President, I wish to take this opportunity to commend the immediate past former Commissioner of Police, Ellison Greenslade, His Excellency now, upon a splendid and successful tenure as Commissioner of Police. He successfully assisted in completing the reforms to the police commenced under the previous Ingram administration. He served with honor and distinction as Commissioner of Police. The force has gone from strength to strength under his tenure. You know, anyone who believes that it is within the power of a Commissioner of Police to stop every crime from happening is entirely misguided, and in such an evaluation is being unfair. It is impossible for all of us to have our guardian police over our shoulder 24/7. Under the Commissioner, we've seen the extension of CCTV programs started under the last F&M government, We have seen the implementation of aggressive community outreach programs, and we've seen the enhancement of the electronic monitoring started under the last FNM government. It wasn't his fault that that certain inefficiencies are allowed to creep in. That's a contractual matter. We hope will be addressed by the present contractor, but my prosecutors are having some problems with the quality of the monitoring data, and I trust that that will be aggressively dealt with. So I commend the Commissioner of Police, the former commissioner, for all that he has done. And I'm sure that he will give us that same eloquent, diplomatic, mentally acute and astute service for which he was renowned in the police force, in the halls of St. James, and in the diplomatic reception halls of Europe. Right now, let me be very blunt about it. In the context of the Bahamas' relationship with Great Britain and the European Union, it's time to put our best foot forward. We need a man of the caliber of Ellison Greenslade in London. There are almost perpetual threats of blacklisting either by the European Union itself or by individual countries who basically have the power just to go ahead and blacklist you if they want to. We need the best that we can field to boldly march into the halls of European capitals, to boldly raise the Bahamian flag and to proclaim our innocence, our abilities, our skills, what we have to offer the world, to defend our institutions, and to advance the best interests of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas in all and every diplomatic mission. Because, yes, there are many around circling who do not have our interests at heart. We need to put our best foot forward. I say that Ellison Greenslade, at this time, is the man for that job. He will take us to another level. Madam President, with these few remarks, I commend both bills to the support of this honorable chamber. Thank you.
Is there a second? The chair recognizes the Honorable Dwight Sawyer.
Good day, Madam President. Today, I rise to second both of these bills put forth by our able Attorney General, and to make my contribution on both bills. Madam President, as you know, I am not a lawyer, but my comments and contribution on this bill will be general and appropriate. And I'd like to thank the Attorney General for that brief education he gave us in explaining all the elements of both bills. And I truly sat here and I enjoyed listening to him. And he did it in such a way, and the clarification was such that even the layman on the street could understand what the Attorney General was speaking about. And I'm quite certain everyone on the streets right now know what both bills are all about in simple layman's terms. And I think that at the end of the day, I think our Attorney General will probably find another profession as being a professor, because he does such an excellent job in clarifying later on, in clarifying most of these things. And I truly enjoyed listening to him. So, Mr. Attorney General, I thank you for that clarification. Today, I rise, first of all, to give my contribution on the bill for an act to amend the Constitution to to provide for the establishment of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution. I was pleased when I read the bill read and passed in the lower house last week, or maybe the week before last. And again, it's another promise by this F&M government being kept. As you know, the Free National Movement in its 2017 manifesto speaks clearly about accountability and transparency. No democratic country or nation should have persons questioning the integrity and execution of duties from our judiciary. Therefore, with the establishment of the Office of the Independent Prosecutor is independent and free of political interference as relates to criminal matters. In a true democracy, it must be that there is no political interference and that cases tried are properly adjudicated. In the past, many had concerns over the role of the Attorney General, and I think the Attorney General explained that role appropriately just a while ago. And if he or she is an elected or appointed official from a political party, then pundits will constantly argue political interference, and this has sometimes been the outcry in the past recent years, where nolly prosequis were granted all over the place. In reading the bill, I found a significant element in it, and that is it's designed to ensure accountability and transparency on the part of the Attorney General. Madam President, any specific directions given by the AG will have to be given in writing. This, in my opinion, brings total transparency to the position and will assist anyone who has a case and need clarification moving forward. There is little doubt that decisions made by the previous Attorneys General left a lot to be desired, and no one was held accountable. It is my understanding that once this bill has been passed, as instances like what happened with the Hotel of West a couple of years ago, the case won't happen anymore. And if it does happen, again, we will have in writing who, what, and why the decision was made. I further understand that the Attorney General will be responsible for civil matters, and in the main, the Director of Public Prosecution will be responsible for criminal matters. However, I understand the Attorney General will have in some case matter of policy, public policy, national security, or international obligations of the Bahamas to give general and specific instructions to the DPP, and this will be rare, and in all cases, written instructions must be given. While this bill will allow the Attorney General to have involvement in some prosecutions, the beauty of this is that it will be transparency, as every instruction must be in writing. Madam President, as I began, I shall finish. It's the people time, and this bill was a promise to the people and will save the people of the Bahamas well. And Madam President, finally, I stand and I fully support this bill moving forward. I now turn my attention to the amendment to the Pension Act. Madam President, the amendment to the Pension Act allows the Commissioner of Police and the Commander of the Defense Force to receive full pension if they serve for at least 25 years as on the force or 7 years in the top position. Last week, or week before last, the former Commissioner of Police, Mr. Ellison Greenslade, stepped down to take a position of High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, where it was a wonderful opportunity that he would have to turn down if we don't pass this amendment. Mr. Greenslade served this country with distinction and was afforded an opportunity to represent the Bahamas in another capacity. But being not a police officer for 40 years or a commissioner for 10 years may have prevented him from doing so. Madam President, the F&M government made a promise to the people to place people in positions that will better serve the country, and Mr. Greenslade will serve our country proudly in the United Kingdom. And Madam President, I at this time fully support this bill, and I thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak on the amendments. Thank you very much. I second the bills. Thank you.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed: the bill for an act to amend the Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas to provide for the establishment of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution and for matters connected thereto. As many?
Madam President, good morning, and good morning again to my fellow senators. Good morning, Bahamas. And as usual today, I give thanks to Almighty God for having the privilege of being in this honorable place to speak on behalf of the people of this great Bahamas. The beginning of my contribution today was related initially to giving of condolences, but we have already done that, so I will bypass that. But Madam President, in another more celebratory note, I would like to congratulate the Department of Antiquities and Monuments, currently under the chairmanship of the Honorable Reese Chipman, our representative from the Centerville constituency. At the Vendu House Museum, a new exhibit has recently opened. It bluntly but forcefully outlines certain aspects of our local history and our people preceding the capture of our forefathers in West Africa. The exhibit captures the rich history of blacks on the African continent, the transport through the Middle Passage, and the period of slavery and that of slave owners in their settlements in the Americas and in the Bahamas, where they created many of the communities that still exist today. The settlement of the locations and the amalgamation of the two cultures, which is of African heritage and European heritage, is done in such a way, Madam President, that we clearly see who we are, why we are, and where we need to be. It also clearly demonstrates the social unrest that occurred in our country in the 40s and 50s. It demonstrates the suffragette movement, majority rule, are all things that are highlighted and inclusive of where we are today. Madam President, the exhibit is very visual, multidimensional, and interactive. And the curator, Mrs. Kim Alton Stubbs, and her team are to be commended and congratulated for a marvelous and educational piece of work. I hope all Bahamians, especially our school children, have the opportunity to see this exhibit. And I think what's important too is that we talk today about some of the individuals who have made their transition. And one of the persons, of course, was Ronnie Butler. And I hope as this exhibit continues and there are changes, updates, that Ronnie Butler and his contribution, particularly in verse and song, can be added as an important aspect of the entire exhibit. I also want to say a few words, Madam President, on a topic which is very visual, which is very topical right now, prior to coming to the bill which we are currently discussing. Many individuals in our communities continues to talk about the current government administration not doing anything and how many bills they had passed at this point in their tenure. I think we are all aware that there is a difference between newly written legislation and amendments to legislation which has already been established. For them, at this point in their tenure, they had passed a significant number of amendments to the budget communication, which, as we know, is already prepared when there is a change in administrations. And these amendments are usually pretty standard and cannot be considered new legislation. Madam President, on August 30th in the Nassau Guardian, a list of 13 bills were listed as the administration's upcoming legislative agenda. 7 of them were new bills, one of those being an amendment bill, and 6 of those 13 bills were amendments to existing bills. So I think when we look at the 13 listings on our legislative agenda, much is being done. Madam President, to move forward in any building process, which any new administration must do when it becomes the government, one must have a solid foundation, built in an orderly fashion, as order is the first law of the universe. God gave us this command when He created the universe, in an orderly fashion. If one tries to build a structure where you don't evaluate the soil first, putting in a solid foundation, that includes not only just cement, but P-rock, which strengthens the foundation. This is what we are in the process of doing. The foundation of our country was stripped away in a very disparate manner, and to move forward, it must be rebuilt. And that is what I think our Prime Minister and his cabinet are trying to do. Madam President, this may not be seen as clearly by us as we experience our experienced international financial observers see it. After 4 downgrades in 5 years by Standard & Poor's, at the last evaluation, they are beginning to see changes that are in the works. A part of this process of rebuilding is educating our supporters and all Bahamians that continuing to spend without checks and balances leads us down a slippery slope of collapse. Our residents must appreciate that they too are part of the building team. The members of the government may be the architects, the engineers, the CEOs, the COOs, and senior managers. But the people are the actual builders, a block at a time. They are the shareholders, and their participation is mandatory. You want dividends from your investment, which is your vote, but you too must be responsible when we are in the process of trying to rebuild, not just with the intent of tearing down because you're not getting what you think you need in a timely fashion. We do not want to be in a situation where you invest millions of dollars into a building, you're in charge, but after spending millions of dollars, you don't know that the building is not insured. So when there is an incident of a fire and the building disappears, your $1 million gets burned up. That's not considered good stewardship. If that building, after its destruction, now has to be re-evaluated in its entirety, that takes time. That is what our new administration is doing. A hurricane loan is obtained, which must be paid back by your and my grandchildren. But dozens of homes who should have received help are still covered in tarps. We need to know, where is the hurricane loan money? Well, maybe it should be in the hands of the people who tarps. As shareholders, we should have equitable and orderly distribution of our dividends. Madam President, my fellow Bahamians, as a new team of managers take over, we must evaluate, make a directional shift, establish ground rule that will take us not only forward, but forward over the long term and be sustainable. Removing the kind of obstacles that allows millions of dollars to be spent on buildings and not insuring it will not give us that privilege. Restructuring is a process that must be, by its very nature, one of temperance. Madam President, it takes a lot of courage to remain steadfast and focused when the shareholders are clamoring for dividends, as does the mother waiting for that baby to get out. And I bring this reference because temperance is nothing new to the Prime Minister. By virtue of his previous profession, he had to wait with a patient for 9 months, a long time, to deliver a patient of her child. Then comes the labor, and we must wait again, although you would like for the process to be quickly done. Our nature does not allow that to happen. And so, equilibrium under duress, in the face of all the clamoring for results, is a hallmark characteristic of our Prime Minister learned over time. Madam President, one of the bills presented to us today regarding the amendment to the Article 78 of the Constitution serves to strengthen an issue the current administration supports passionately, and this is corruption encroaching on the rule of law. When a government is free of corruption, emerging small countries' economies experience progress. We see now why the IDB, the IMF, the World Bank are in the forefront of international anti-corruption movements. They have come to realize that when new projects and investments are only capital intensive, with little investment in human and social infrastructure, opens the doors for possible corruption. Corruption leads to bad public administration, which is related inversely to progress, affects the lower income recipients of a country as it tries to make itself self-sustaining. And so, to avoid the bureaucracies that is usually established to avoid corruption, it is something which must be done timely, steadily, sustainability. Madam President, the Minister administration has prompted the anticipated increase in bureaucratic costs by simplifying the methodology of doing business, thus decreasing the cost, especially for the lower income individuals. Madam President, August of this year, when the government reveals its list of new and amended bills, the amendment to the Constitution for repeal and replacement of Article 78 was one of the bills listed, allowing us to be on our way towards fulfilling the promises made to the people. The importance of this amendment, in addition to changes in tenure, now allows the DPP the power to institute and undertake criminal proceedings against any person, economically advantaged or not. And these individuals, despite the depth of their pocketbooks, can be taken before any court in respect of any offense against the laws of the state. It also allows the DPP to discontinue, in the absence of judgment being rendered, any criminal proceedings which appears inappropriate. The deterrent of government ministerial interference is tempered by the fact that any such specific direction must be given in writing and signed by the Attorney General. And so, Madam President, this prevents the tail from wagging the dog, as it will lessen the possibility of verbal directions being given in the event there is unscrupulous reasons being present. And so, Madam President, I support this amendment and would like to thank one of our eminent and fact-telling journalists, not one of our biggest fans, Mrs. Nikki Kelly, for being fearless enough to commend the government for doing so much better in its first 6 months than she ever expected. I thank you.
As many? The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Jo Beth Colby Davis.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Senate colleagues, my fellow Bahamians, I'm grateful to God and thank Him for another opportunity to stand here and represent the Bahamian people, and I do not take these moments that I stand here to advocate for them lightly. Madam President, before I get into my contribution in this place, I wish to send congratulations to the new leader of the Progressive Liberal Party and the leader of Her Majesty Loyal Opposition, the Honorable Philip Davis, MP for Cat Island, San Salvador, and Rum Key. I send congratulations out to our newly elected Deputy Leader, Honorable I. Chester Cooper, MP for Exuma and Ragged Islands. I congratulate my colleague in this place, Leader of Opposition Senate, Senator Frederick Mitchell, as the new chairman, and congratulate the former Senator Robin Lyons as the new Deputy Chairman, and scores of other party supporters and members that have offered themselves to serve in the Progressive Liberal Party. Madam President, I move now to discuss amendments offered to the Constitution. Madam President, the bill seeks to establish within the constitutional framework of the Bahamas the office of the Director of Public Prosecutor. This in itself is a welcome change. By enshrining in the Constitution the office of the DPP, the bill save for its deficiencies, elevates the status of the DPP from a mere functionary within the office of the Attorney General to a constitutional officer. However, I wish to speak on two matters that concern me with the proposed amendment. Madam President, my first concern is the reservations in the amendment at Section 78.3, which grants the AG the authority in any case involving considerations of public policy, national security, or the international obligations of the Bahamas to give general or specific directions to the Director of Public Prosecutions, and the fact that the Director shall act in accordance with those directions. Now, I heard today that the AG spoke about some amendment that their directions must be in writing, signed by the AG and gazetted, and I also heard that he spoke to supporting documents and code of ethics. However, I will continue on with my concerns because I'm speaking to the document as it lies in front of me. Madam President, I reviewed the Constitution of various countries in the Caribbean and other places to determine the precedent that was relied on by this government to maintain within the amendment of reservations for the AG. The one that came close was in the United Kingdom, where prior to 1985, the Attorney General was charged with the superintendence of the DPP, as well as the power to direct institution of proceedings of special cases. However, Madam President, since 1985, in the UK, you would find that the AG is no longer empowered to direct, but continues to superintend the work of the DPP. This relationship is recognized and regulated by a number of protocols that requires the AG safeguard the independence of the DPP. The mentioned protocols are explicit in that the AG must not seek to give direction to the DPP in any individual case, save for exceptional circumstances where it is necessary to safeguard national security. Additionally, Madam President, there exists in the UK other safeguards, one being the Code of Crown Prosecutors, which invariably speaks to and defends the independence of the office of the DPP. A further safeguard in the UK is the Statement of Ethical Principles for the Public Prosecutors, which gives guiding principles to the work of the DPP and prosecutors. One statement in this ethical guideline requires reporting by the DPP or prosecutor of any improper attempts to influence their decision-making. Madam President, I gave that bit of information because I wanted to draw attention to that in the UK, whilst the AG retains some form of oversight of the Office of DPP, there exists a number of safeguards to ensure the integrity and independence of that office. However, the concern that I have with the amendment as presented is the AG remains to have significant powers over the DPP, which in itself is concerning and already dissipates the notion of independence. Madam President, though I was happy to hear about comments of the intent to produce code of ethics, I didn't see, whilst I was reviewing the Constitution, any mention of accompanying safeguards that would ensure an overbearing AG, government, or political directorate is not allowed to exercise undue pressure or influence over the DPP. Further, Madam President, the AG reservation of power over the DPP is that of public policy, which it is well known that public policy is very broad. There is widespread judicial support that defines public policy as a principle of judicial legislation or interpretation founded on the current need of society. From this definition, it is evident that the notion of public policy is variable and ambiguous. Carving out public policy as a blanket area under which the AG may specifically direct the DPP is a clear encroachment on the independence of the office. What is and what can be considered public policy is vague, undetermined, and of a considerably wide scope. In effect, Madam President, the AG would have constitutional power to direct the DPP on any number of matters and claim public policy as the reason. Surely, this cannot be what is intended. Therefore, Madam President, it is my suggestion that the government rethink those vague public policy reservations that has been granted to the AG. And if for any reason they wish to reserve specific offenses whereby the AG can intervene and assist the DPP, they can take a page out of Barbados Constitution, which during my review, it appeared that Barbados Constitution at section 79A gives specific offenses when the AG may give general or specific directions to the DPP. There are offenses related to situations like piracy, foreign enlistment, treason, sedition, mutiny, unlawful oaths, those sort of things. So Barbados Constitution specifically details when and if the AG can intervene. And so, Madam President, it is my suggestion that the government may consider presenting specific areas where the AG can intervene, or otherwise they should look to put in safeguards and ethical policies as implemented in the UK. And then it would be suitable for the office of the DPP to state that the office of the DPP is independent. Madam President, I also heard comments by the AG regarding tenure. However, I still have concerns and I will raise them. My concern with the second part of this bill is the matter of tenure of the DPP at section 78B. Madam President, security of tenure is a cornerstone of the constitutional provisions for judicial independence in the Bahamas. As stated in the bill, the standard by which the DPP is selected as prescribed by this bill is the same way by which we select judicial officers. It is noted that in the Bahamas, the appointment of a judicial officer remains to be in place until he reaches retirement age, subject to a condition permitting his or her removal for inability or for misbehavior. The intention there is to insulate judicial officers from the temptation to cater to the wishes of the political directorate to preserve or prolong their continuation in office. Madam President, it is significant that the standard for the selection of the DPP mirrors that of those provided for judges, but the bill seeks to prescribe a 5-year appointment of the DPP and a maximum 10-year appointment, notably deviating from the tenure of judges. Madam President, I have great concern with the tenure provided to the DPP, as he or she should be endowed with the same qualities of independence as the judiciary to ensure that the criminal justice system is independent of political and other improper influences. Thus, Madam President, if our judiciary is regarded as independent and impartial, and if our system of government should be seen as based on the separation of powers, it then follows that the DPP, under the umbrella of the judiciary, should be given security of tenure. Madam President, it would seem clear that the DPP would be protected from political and other improper influences to the same extent the judiciary if the office had security. Madam President, I now move to my discussions on the pension amendment bill. I do not intend to be on this matter at length because it's almost clear what the motive is.
Sorry, Madam President, on a point of order.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Carl Bethel on a point of order.
Thank you very much. On the question of tenure of the Director of Public Prosecutions, I'm not sure whether the Honorable Senator has fully read or inwardly digested, having read, the provisions of Article 78B 2 and 3, which make it very clear that the only way in which a DPP could be removed from office while in office is by the same procedure that applies to the removal of a serving justice. Okay, and therefore, he has the highest level of security of tenure known to the Bahamas Constitution. Anything more than that would be a construct unknown to our Constitution. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President, thank you, but I did make that comment, and I was speaking to the term in the 5 years that is input in the Constitution to the term of the DPP. That is what I was speaking to. I wasn't speaking to that because I did make mention that the same standards are applied. So you wasn't clarifying anything because I already pointed that out. I was speaking to the 5-year term. And that's it. Are we going to go back and forth because I clarified that you were incorrect on what I said?
Madam President.
Is there, I'm going to have to hear what this point of order is now.
Yeah, this point of order.
Yes.
This point of order is quite simply this, that as I stated in my communications, the government determined on a policy basis that we did not wish to have a chief prosecutor having tenure for their natural life until they reach the age of 68. Our argument and our policy position on that is that we do not want J. Edgar Hoovers in the making. And that is highly debatable on all counts. on all counts. No. So the point being that the length of an appointment is not the same as tenure. Tenure is how and in what circumstances you can be removed in your period of appointment. The only way that a serving DPP can be removed within the term of his appointment is by following the same procedure that applies to a Supreme Court judge. In this case, yes, as I've often said, and as my learned colleague to my right, Senator Thompson, Minister, just said, tenure in this case is 10 years. The tenure is 10 years. Maximum of 10 years or 68. That's your tenure.
Thank you, Senator. Let me just say here, Senator Bethel, as the mover of this bill, you'll have an opportunity to do any further clarifications, but I will not. I would like to allow Senator Jo Beth Colby to continue with her presentation uninterrupted.
Thank you, Madam President. I move now to the Pensions Amendment Bill, and I stick to that 5-year was not sufficient in my mind, okay? Madam President, I now provide comments to the Pensions Amendment Bill. Now, as I stated before, I do not intend to be before this long because I understand that my colleagues on the side opposite spoke to the fact that it is important for them to make this change because they found indeed that former Commissioner Greenslade possessed so much qualities that he must be sent off to be the High Commissioner as opposed to remaining as just Commissioner of Police. And that's And that's their argument as to why they think that it's important. But how I see it is a little bit differently. How I see it is we had a commissioner that was in place, and following the change to government, that commissioner became very silent in his position. So silent that it became concerning. Additionally, a number of press notices came out of the office.
Senators, I'd like to hear our female senator speaking.
Thank you, Madam President. So silent that it became concerning. Additionally, we would see occasionally a number of notices, press notices, coming from former Commissioner Greenslade, stating and advising of vacation leave and this and that. And then we hear that our former commissioner was appointed to the High Commission to London. However, I now wonder where did this, I began to wonder where did this lucky number 7 came about? And what was the rush for bringing this pension amendment? And who asked you to do this? It does mean completion, but who is completing what? Because he didn't complete, or did he? Madam President, what is ironic and maybe coincidental is that commissioner served for a total of 7 years. And so I started to question 7 to change in the pension, and the commissioner served for 7. I wonder how they arrived at this number 7. The amendment had a great cloud of convenience, as it appeared to me, Madam President, that this is to satisfy the outgoing commissioner. I'm even more confused at the timing, because within the government first 6 months, despite the many other matters that presently plague our country, I will leave with them a number of questions that they should answer to the Bahamian people. Why amend this pension bill now? This never came up during the campaign or even in the speech from the throne, unless I missed it. So why does this amendment take leave before amendments and policy positions that would effectively change the lives of Bahamians or assist with growing this economy? Why the rush? What is the significance? And why does this 7 years seem so coincidental with the same time served as the outgoing commissioner? When I last spoke, Madam President, I asked the government to provide governing plans and policy positions on specific matters and problems Bahamians are facing. I think it's important for me to list them again, because I'm baffled at the importance being placed on amending the Pensions Act when we have real issues which need real solutions, and it takes real leaders to bring about positive changes. So I ask the government again to provide the people of the Bahamas with your governing policy, plan, and your government's position on the following: the reduction of crime in our society, how to fix Grand Bahama, reform of immigration policy, ease of doing business to encourage entrepreneurship and foreign direct investment, matters related to climate change and energy conservation. Produce an efficient and effective plan to eliminate the substandard conditions under which too many people live. Free UB education as promised. New strategies for economic improvement of our family islands. Suitable expansion of our tourism industry. Reinvigorate our financial sectors. Promote economic growth and prosperity in all other sectors, and protect our coastal and marine environment and our fishery resources. Madam President, as I remain confused to the timing and the importance being placed on this amendment, I ask the government to get focused, get on with the important business of the people and matters that would bring relief and govern this Bahamas. Madam President, I wish to speak to a few more things before I take my seat. One thing is, I heard recently, I think it was either in the House or in conversation, that the Prime Minister had advised that in the next budget he would be speaking to tax incentives of the over-the-hill communities. And however, I haven't heard much details related to the tax incentives. So I just want to bring back to the forefront of the minds of the AG and the Prime Minister and others listening some of the things that I stated in my first contribution. So whilst they are preparing themselves to bring this information and detail to the Bahamian people, this can be thought of. Would they have regulations and stipulations in place to safeguard and protect the system from dishonesty? I queried whether the government will initiate a study to determine the owners of the property in the over-the-hill community to ensure proper title has been declared on the properties, and we understand how they will be managing the revitalization project that they proposed. And if the study determines that it is indeed owned by the less fortunate, tax incentives for urbanization can prove beneficial to incentivize development. Following my queries, the Attorney General in this place confirmed that the government was indeed commencing a study to provide the necessary information. So I just question whether that study has been completed and what is the results of that study. And if they can provide some summary to the Bahamian public of how that study would have went, that they promised they would carry out. Madam President, if they have found that it is the landlords and they are wealthy Bahamians, I ask that the government pass regulations that provide use of land standards, which would require the landlords of those over-the-hill communities to maintain their property at appropriate levels, and therefore we wouldn't, as the government has to take, as the people of the Bahamas, wouldn't have to take on so much of the cost of this revitalization project. Madam President, I also remind them of the term that I used in my contribution that speaks to gentrification. And I spoke about how this can be detrimental to our people that lives in those communities, and that they may be careful that any situation that they are coming up with regarding the revitalization and the beautification of the community does not affect and misplace those persons living in the community. And so I just remind them that they ensure any form of revitalization blocks the development of condos, townhomes, or any form of development that will misplace the people of the over-the-hill community, because they will not be able to afford to live there anymore. Madam President, I want to move now to the issue of citizenship, which has been commented on as well by the government. I turn to, Madam President, yes, thank you, Madam President. I turn to briefly discuss the matter of citizenship and the government's intent to amend the Bahamas Nationality Act and the Status of Children's Act to grant children of Bahamian women born outside of the Bahamas and children of unwed Bahamian men as well automatic citizenship. There is apparently a legal argument that ensues with this move by the government. Some legal minds would argue that this is unconstitutional and that the intent of the Constitution is clear to protect the sovereignty of the Bahamas and the birthright. Therefore, the Constitution speaks specifically to matters where persons must be granted citizenship by providing specific categories. It is the Constitution that, based on the specific categories of eligibility, determines who is to be conferred Bahamian citizenship. Therefore, by that notion, it should be the Bahamian people, by virtue of changes to the Constitution, who should determine when and how those specific categories of eligible persons for Bahamian citizenship can be changed or amended. Madam President, I look forward to the Attorney General providing information on how the government intends to accomplish the granting of citizenship to these persons through legislative changes without violating the provision of Article 13A in the Constitution, which grants Parliament privilege to make laws regarding citizenship only on matters where the Constitution is silent. Madam President, there's also a fundamental concern of morale, as I am also baffled by the outright silencing of the Bahamian electorate, who loudly declared a year ago that they did not wish for changes to citizenship to occur. This is not the first, but second time the Bahamian public rejected such change to the Constitution. Additionally, this is the same government that thought it important to continually remind the electorate during their campaign that the PLP ignored their gaming referendum results and created the legislation for the regulation of the gaming houses. For this reason, they told the electorate to outrightly reject the PLP because they have outrightly ignored their voices. Therefore, I am quite unclear why the government now, after being empowered, thinks it wise to make such amendments without regard for the Bahamian public that rejected 2 referendums that seek to amend the Constitution section on citizenship. Additionally, Madam President, I also find it interesting that this government think it is okay for them to take upon themselves and make changes to the Nationality Act when 2 successive governments gave the public the respect and authority to determine whether they wish for such constitutional changes. Does this government, I ask, think this move would be popular? Do they not care about the voices of the people? And when are we going to stop playing politics with the Bahamian people emotions? Madam President, this government had the opportunity to provide a united front on the issues of citizenship when the referendum was presented a year ago. If I am not mistaken, the AG, I think, was a part of the Constitutional Committee that provided the questions for that referendum. This is also the government that campaigned on reducing the deficit. So why, when in opposition, you didn't try to save us money to ensure the success of the referendum? Madam President, I am of the belief that had both parties joined together a year ago and presented a united front on the issues of citizenship and spoke in one voice as one Bahamas, educating the electorate on the importance of a yes vote to the particular questions which they now seek to amend by virtue of legislative changes, I am of the strong view and opinion that the end result may have been in the affirmative. Madam President, sometimes I wonder, what is more important to many of our politicians? Is fixing the Bahamas and moving this country forward more important than playing politics? If so, then I question why, when the same questions were presented a year ago, we didn't have more unity, insightfulness, and optimism by the F&M administration. It is just unfortunate how we sometimes allow ourselves to be misguided by personality and selfish agendas. However, I want the best for the Bahamian people. When I went to the polls, I voted yes, because I do believe that the children of Bahamian women born outside the Bahamas and children of unwed Bahamian men should not have to feel rejected and misplaced. They should be granted, listen, they should be granted the ability to Bahamian citizenship. And while I am happy the government is placing focus on this issue of citizenship, I remain to agree with legal arguments presented that it should be amended by changes to the Constitution, which requires a vote by the Bahamian people. Therefore, Madam President, I caution the government to reconsider plans of going against the will of the people. Before I take my seat, I want to speak to the most popular topic over the last 2 weeks. The Prime Minister stood in the other place and gave notice that he intends to seek a raise for the members of Parliament at the next budget. And I found that so interesting, Madam President. You know how our former Prime Minister Christie would say, this is a teachable moment. Well, when that notice was given in the House of Assembly, to me, that was a laughable moment. Madam President, the audacity of this government to think life is just peaches and creams and raises are just dropping out of the sky. At a time when scores of Bahamians since May 10th are being given another form of notice, one that sounds something like this: we thank you for your services and wish you well in your future endeavors. Leaving these same Bahamians, many who are young persons and just wanting to make an honest living and build their life and careers, leaving them jobless, hopeless, and optionless. Madam President, this enraged me because I sat and thought on a regular government job when hired If I'm correct, you are on a 6-month probation, following which you go through a procedure of performance review, and then you enter into your contract if things seem to have been going well. So this government essentially is 6 months in at the performance review mark. And lately, all of the people that they told it was their time seem to be angry, discouraged, disappointed, and frustrated. In addition, Madam President, for some strange reason, this government thinks that after granting tax incentives and relief to those to ensure their aircraft parts are fixed, to all companies making 50 million profit or more, to those needing to buy more washers and dryers, to those who want to eat caviar after satisfying the needs of those who are not in need, taking a 10-week vacation, presenting legislation on a not-so-independent DPP, changing the Pensions Act to 7 years, the same time someone who only served 7 years was moving on to another post. After telling the Bahamian people, you voted against the citizenship and now we found a loophole, so oh well, we don't need your permission. After backtracking and stating to the people we will have to wait a little longer before focusing on campaign promises because the cupboard is bare, this government now says, before any policy announcement on bringing some relief to the less fortunate, before any confirmation on developments to reduce crime, before any information on how to grow this economy and bring foreign investment to create more jobs, before any of the necessary and important matters are discussed, which clearly defines the direction in which this country is going, the government wishes to first deal with the matter of raising their salary so they then can get to work. Madam President, I say to this government, no way, Jose. Because the only things raising right now is crime and the unemployment rate. And be careful to this government. In a few years, they do not encourage the Bahamian people to say to them, hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back. So, Madam President, I ask this government to give something else a raise. Let us raise awareness of the teachers and nurses that have worked tirelessly for many years at their salaries, who essentially are the backbones of society, with teachers being the one to educate our children, preparing them for the real world, and nurses that care for us and bring us back to good health. When are we going to give them what they rightly deserve? Let us raise awareness on the problems being faced in Long Island, the cries for an updated airport, one that would facilitate more airlines and therefore bring in a larger group of tourists to that island and assist with building that economy. Who is gathering the necessary funding to assist with that project? Let us raise awareness of those workers at the post office that have been picketing in the hot sun to ensure their voices are heard, who have worked in horrible and deplorable conditions and is now unable to perform their duties, which is detrimental to the postal service of our country, especially at one of the busiest seasons of the year. When will we remedy that situation? On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being extremely important, where does this post office concern fall on the list of priorities for this government? Let us raise awareness for those workers on Chubb Key who respectfully stood in unity to send a message via video to the government, explaining that the system of granting these building permits to approve the continuation of their project is moving at a glacier pace, so slow that their jobs are now being threatened. Madam President, I want to remind the government that it's important that much focus and attention is placed on these very serious issues, and many more that our people are faced with on a daily basis. The government must do the work as promised in their manifesto and the speech from the throne. Madam President, many persons are hurting in this country, and time is of the essence. As I grew and faced situations in life, I was always careful how I treated others whilst I was dealing with things, because it is a true saying that hurt people, and the Bahamian people are hurting. They want answers. This government promised transparency, and however, they have yet to figure out how to remain consistent and on message. However, to my Bahamian people, let me just state, the government is not supposed to give you anything. So those comments of persons saying they didn't do anything for me should stop, because it almost encourages the same actions that we despise. However, it is the duty of governments to implement policies and legislations, plans and programs that will make life better for the people. It is the duty of the government of the Bahamas to make life better for the Bahamians. The F&M on their campaign promised to make life better for the people. Therefore, Madam President, the focus and attention should be on finding ways to bring in foreign investment, tax relief, jobs, industries, and many other avenues that will bring about the relief in the country that can be felt across the entire Bahamas in a positive way that makes life better for Bahamians. Madam President, last week my niece called me. Her name is Zion Taylor, and she is 7 years old in the 3rd grade at the International School in Turks and Caicos. She said, Auntie Joey, as she calls me, I am on student council at my school and I have to give a speech to the students. And she wanted to read the speech so that I can hear her. As she read, she said something that resonated with me. And I told her, wow, you are actually helping Auntie with her speech. She said to the students at the international school, this is your school. So remember, you must treat your school how you want your school to treat you. So I paraphrase that, and I say to this government, this is your Bahamas. You must treat the Bahamian people how you want them to treat you in 5 years. So as I end, I implore this government to be mindful that they are here to work for the people. As a result, that alone should be their focus. Your just reward would come in 5 years. If you have done well for the people, they will return you. And if you have done well for the Bahamian economy, no one will disagree with you receiving an increase. As Galatians 6 and 9 states, be not weary in well-doing, for in due season you will reap if you faint not. And also to my Bahamian people, each time I stand, I am an advocate for you to ensure that you are being treated with respect, the respect you deserve. And so I also wish to leave with you a word of encouragement. Continue to use your voices across the media airwaves and social media to demand you, the people, get from this government what you rightfully deserve. Therefore, stay strong in the fight for what is right. And if we march, stop marching with you. Be not discouraged and continue to pledge to excel through love and unity, pressing onward and marching together. And press on matters that are important to you across this Bahamas, because this land is your land. As you silently hum the last segment of our national anthem with pride and strength, till the road you've trod lead unto your God. March on, Bahama land. Madam President, I have presented my concerns on behalf of the people of the Bahamas, and my only hope is that they do not fall on deaf ears. I do support both pieces of bills in this place today, and I hope in the future we are able to discuss pieces of legislation that brings about the growth in the economy that we all so desire. May God bless the people. May God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
As many.
Madam President, we have somewhat gone over the usual time for break in order to accommodate the passion of the last speaker, which I will throw some cold water on later on this evening when I bring you facts and not rhetoric. But in the meanwhile, subject to recognizing the next senator, I'd like to move the motion to suspend for lunch.
Thank you.
It's time to get recognized.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Jamal Moss.
Thank you, Madam President. That being done and happily effected, I now move that the business of the Senate be suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon, 20th May 2017.
It has been moved and seconded that the business of the Senate suspend to 3 p.m. this afternoon. I'm sorry. It's been moved and seconded that the business of the House do now suspend to 3 p.m. today. As many are in favor, say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The business of the House suspends to 3 p.m. this afternoon, 20th of November, 2017.